arrange a separate session on this point. Before going further, I'm going to start with the formal introduction of Dr. Usman Raza. Dr. Usman Raza is a Fulbright scholar. He's completed his MS in Health Policy and Management from Harvard University through Fulbright Scholarship. He has also completed a second Master in Information Management System from UC Berkeley, which make him a very unique resource for us to get guidance and get comparison between Fulbright versus direct admission. He is a physician, manager, and information scientist. He manages teams to develop health-related softwares using artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, microservices, and other modern technology. So first of all, Dr. Usman, thanks a lot. I'm sure that you have a busy schedule, especially coming online early morning on a weekend is not easy. So first, we are extremely thankful on behalf of our viewers to give us time.
Thank you, Amir. I'm pleased to be here.
Okay, so without wasting any further time and directly going into the subject, would you like to give us an overview of the topic in general, just an introduction of the topic in general?
Sure. So I think what we're trying to compare is different pathways to graduate studies in the US. And the Fulbright Scholarship or any other similar scholarship programs like that are one kind of path, and then there are other ways people can directly apply for admissions and try to fund their education in different ways. So I'm hoping to provide a comparison because I was lucky enough to be able to do both. It's been a long process, but I have first-hand experience of both directions.
Right. So sorry for this. I think there was some problem in the adjustment of my screen. So going forward with, can you give us an overview of the whole of the process? And as I mentioned in my introduction as well, last week we had a panel discussion on the different aspects of the Fulbright scholarship application process, which is an extensive process. But can you give us an overview with particular emphasis on the part where you what you have to do after completion of your degree or when you come back? So you can start with obviously with the application process, but then with the specific emphasis on the part where you come back and how you deal with the other requirements related to Fulbright scholarship program.
Sure. So let me start with the Fulbright side of things, and it's been almost 10 years now. So it's been a while, but I think the basics remain the same. The process itself, the application and going through admissions and all that, using Fulbright as a sponsor is a one-year process. As anyone who has tried this might know, it takes 1 year to do all the things that you need to do to finally land and get started with your graduate studies. So because it's a long process, it's an important decision in your career, whether or not you want to go ahead with it. I'm not going to go into details of the application process. I think you've covered that in another panel discussion, so we can skip that. But it should suffice to say that you have to do many things like GRE, TOEFL, IELTS. Now maybe some universities don't require that. You have to apply formally with personal statements and study objectives and get letters of recommendation and lots of other things that you have to go through, complete interviews and all that. But the point is, it's a long process. When I did it, I was working on a full-time job, but the job was not too heavy. So I would still say one can do this easily while working. Then once you're through that process, then there's a point where Fulbright or U.S. Education Foundation will apply for your admissions, and that's one of the biggest difference between going through a Fulbright versus directly applying to a university, is that sometimes the choices that Fulbright or U.S. education will pick for you may be different from what you have been thinking about, but they always try to pick something that they think would make most sense given your background and qualifications, and to maximize your chances of acceptance. And the other thing then I will say is, once you're through admission and all that process, you get a J visa, which is different from the F student visa that you get when you're applying to a university and going for a master's or a PhD. And J visa is an exchange visa. That means it's a cultural exchange visa. That means you have some requirements to fulfill. So once you're complete, you're done with your program, you have to go back to your home country, and there's a requirement of at least 2 years, I believe. It may be more for some situations for home residency. The other thing I'll say about Fulbright process is, and this is not specifically for J visa, but the Fulbright program that we have in Pakistan requires that we return to the country right after the program completes. Now, I know that some people have been able to work around those restrictions at times. I'm not privy to the details of how they worked out, but in certain scenarios, if somebody goes for a master's program and they want to actually continue in a PhD program, for example, they could do that, I believe. But that's one of the restrictions that you have when you are going through a Fulbright program. And tied to that same restriction is the problem, or I'm calling it a problem, but it's just the result of that restriction, that you cannot usually gain full-time job experience in the U.S. right after the program completes. And that, in my opinion, is a drawback after having gone through this whole process. I certainly did not think it was a drawback at the time I was going through the Fulbright process. But yeah, that's how I would summarize the whole Fulbright scholarship program, or different issues that we've seen.
So as you have a very unique experience, and first of all, we are going to talk about all of the experience in combination. But first of all, when you went back in Pakistan and you worked, so what specific challenges did you face in acquiring a job? So there are different aspects to this question. One is like acquiring jobs and then getting settled over there. Especially you are kind of used to living in the US developed world environment, and when you go back, the situation is different. The work conditions are different. So what do you think about that? First of all, about acquiring job.
Yeah, so that is definitely something that becomes a challenge once you are returning after the program is complete. I will say there are cultural aspects to that. So you might have heard the term reverse culture shock. It's a broad term. It represents many different aspects. It includes the reverse culture shock that you get when you come back and you have certain expectations and those are not fulfilled. And then there are expectations around how work environment should be or academics should be, and they're not like that. And then there are social kind of cultural differences that when you return, and this is especially if you're going for a master's 1 year or 2 year program, that's less likely to happen because it's just 1 or 2 years. For a PhD, that takes maybe 4, 5, 6 years. That person, if they've not been visiting or they've not been in touch with the home country for a long time, it becomes more of a challenge when they've spent a lot more time in a different environment. So talking about getting a job, there are two basic situations. Somebody goes out from the country on a Fulbright program and they already have a job, and so they take a leave or a sabbatical or something like that, and they still retain their position, and when they come back, they can just join and continue. The other category is you resign or you don't have a job and you just go for a program. Then you come back, you have to start looking fresh for a new job. In both situations, there are some challenges. I was definitely in the second category. So when I came back, I had to start looking for a new job. And one of the challenges, and it's part of the culture shock, but also some misplaced expectations, I would say, on behalf of the people who are coming back to the country, is that usually people think, okay, I've completed a very good program in one of the top places in the world, and so when I come back now, I should be rewarded with a very good job, with good salary, and people might be surprised that that's not how it's going to work out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. In my case, it definitely did not work out like that. The first job that I was offered was, I will not name the institution, but I was pretty upset after receiving that offer, after having several interviews. And it was basically the same salary as you would pay somebody who has just completed their house job and they're just starting as a medical officer or somewhere around that grade. And here I was thinking, hey, I just came back after spending 2 years at one of the top universities. So the country or the program spent $100, $150 or $200,000 on me, do crore rupees. And is there no difference between all this investment versus no investment? And so I was very upset to start with. Luckily, then I got multiple offers from different places in Islamabad, Lahore, Peshawar, and I settled on one. And so things were smooth after that. It took me a month to find a job that I was happy with a salary that was acceptable to me. So that was one of the big issues, and is one of the big issues. If you're coming back, you might have some expectations around how you will be treated in the job market, and they may not be true. Kind of similar challenge can happen with people who have a job and they've taken a leave and they're coming back. So when they're coming back, usually they will have expectations around, okay, I should get promoted or I should get a salary bump. Because now I'm coming back with an advanced degree and I have more knowledge and skills. That is fair if you can get that in writing from your employer before you start your program. That would be the best situation. But if you haven't done that, then you should keep in mind that this kind of request may not be entertained. So somebody might say, you've actually been out of the job for 2 years. So why should we promote you? While other people have been working on interesting projects and they've been moving forward. So that's another kind of challenge that could come up, and people should keep that in mind. Outside of these kind of issues, there are family expectations. Sometimes there are social issues. Somebody trying to get married, and people have expectations that, okay, you're coming back from United States and you must be landing a very good job and you'll be earning, and those kind of expectations are also sometimes there. And so then I want to touch on another point which relates to the work culture, and I definitely face that in some places, which is when you have coworkers who have not been so lucky as you have been, going abroad and completing a program from a very good university, there may be some kind of I would say envy or even animosity from coworkers who are not very happy about this, and I'll be very frank, it's kind of natural. Sometimes you should expect that not everybody is going to be very happy for you to be there, especially if you uh, start in a new job, and you're trying to bring in or copy paste everything that you've learned from abroad, and every idea is like, oh, in the United States you do it this way and that's how we should do it. People might start getting alienated and not very happy to support you or encourage you. So that can create problems in workplace. Um, other things that we already know, there's a very systemic way of things happening or processes happening in organizations in the United States or most of the Western developed countries. In our country, in Pakistan, uh, there is no hidden. It's not a hidden fact that there is corruption in the system. There are delays. The pace of work is pretty slow, especially in governmental organizations. So adjusting to that kind of environment can become challenging, sometimes depressing for the person who has just come back from a very different place.
Right. And adding to that, one other aspect is that you did your master from Harvard, which is obviously a very well-known and well-reputed institutions. But if somebody is coming from a organization which will be a good organization, I mean, any institution inside the US has a reasonable level of repute. But if you go to Pakistan and if you say, okay, I've done master from X university, which is not known, so do you hear such stories that okay, uh, like I have people have done their degrees from apparently good institutions, but those good institutions are not well known in Pakistan, and okay, the expectations level will be very high, but the same thing, does that thing also apply to this challenge list of challenges?
I would say there's a general kind of social value attached to having education from United States, and then I would put the UK very close to that. And anybody who's completed a program in the United States and they've come back, they have that social value attached to that. Oh, this person has been abroad and completed the education outside of Pakistan, so that must be very good. Uh, Only people who have more exposure to these different universities will be able to differentiate. This is actually, so Brown University, maybe nobody has heard of. It's it's an excellent place. And I can name many others like that, which are not well known. Harvard or Stanford or MIT or Johns Hopkins or these kind of places are obviously, at the top. So a lot of people have known about these places. So these have a specific value attached to that. So one of the problems that I actually faced was um, the first place I started working was very conducive environment, very helpful and encouraging and supporting coworkers. But another issue that I was seeing was I was seen as somebody who can basically do anything, solve any problem, even if it's not in my area of expertise. I was expected to deliver and perform and solve problems that are not my forte. Uh, just because I've got a Harvard degree. So I did face a little bit of that too.
Right. So let's shift gears a bit and focus on another aspect of this discussion. And let's assume somebody has done their degree in areas like data science or advanced analytics or things like that, or any other area which are emerging fields, but they're the industry or the job market in Pakistan is not very much mature. Or there are not enough relevant opportunities for that. So what happens is that a person does a master or a PhD in that particular field, and then when you go back to Pakistan, you are either considered as a leader in that area with you coming out from the degree and you not having any industry or academic experience. And what happens that you directly go to a leadership role over there, but at the same time, the fact that you do not have any experience, and at the same time you do not, since you do not join any mentor, any program with under the supervision of any senior mentor or any job market, you kind of get disconnected from the job market. So what do you think about this aspect of this challenge, and how you think that it should be taken care of by the students?
Sure. So there are two challenges there. One is your selection of, or your choice of what you're studying. And so part of that is, think about when you're choosing something to study, or going for a master's or especially for a PhD program, because it's an extensive investment of many years. You should think about, how is this applicable in my home country or internationally, for that matter. If it depends on where you want to work eventually. If you are hell bent on being specific to one country, then you should definitely think about, how is this applicable to this country. So um, that's one factor. But like you said, you go abroad, you gain knowledge in an area which is less known in your country, and you come back, you could end up being in a position where you're expected to do a lot of new things in that field, but you actually don't have a job experience. So that's another challenge, obviously. Having job experience in that field in a place which is where it's well established would help a lot. What people can do, at least, especially those who are in a 2 years master's program, is getting internships, full-time internship experiences in the US in the same field that they are pursuing. And I did that myself, and it definitely helped me, because studying in a university and completing courses is one thing, and it's great too. I very much enjoyed my program at Harvard and gaining all that knowledge. But actually working in the US job market and getting first-hand experience of working in an organization full-time is another thing, and there's nothing that can replace that. So I would definitely say people should try to get internships. If there's a way that they can spend some time after the master's doing a full-time job over there, that would be excellent. I know that if you're going through a direct admissions process, like you go for a F1 visa, you're not using Fulbright as a way to get your education, then you actually have the option of what is called as the OPT, or optional practical training. It's called academic training, and people after completing their program are allowed to spend 1 to 3 years, depending on your choice of, depending on your field of study. So STEM degrees allow up to 3 years, and so that's one of the best ways to gain experience. So not only would you gain knowledge, but you would also gain experience of how to apply that knowledge. And once you have that, it becomes a lot more, you're more solid in how you can become a leader in that field.
Okay, so now let's move towards the second part of our discussion, which is, okay, so first of all, very much relevant to you, like people do their masters and the natural courses to do a PhD after that, or if you want to do another degree. So what motivated you to come back to US and get admission in a second master program rather than going into a PhD program?
Yeah, so I think part of it is because a lot of people, when they're starting with a master's program, they may not have a good idea of what exactly they want to get into. So when I applied for Fulbright, I actually applied for a master's leading to PhD program. So that means that I would complete a master's and continue into a PhD program in the same university. I ended up in Harvard. I started a master's program. I looked at the practicality of those options, and there were some issues there, because HEC had some requirement of completing a PhD within 4 years. And when I talked to my supervisors there, they didn't think that a PhD in health policy would take anything less than 6 years, and there was just no way to imagine that. So there were those kind of issues, but at some point I realized that I was more interested in practicing policy and management more than getting involved in deep in research or academia. So although I've done a little bit of academia and research work in public health generally, my primary specialty is actually practice of public health and applying the knowledge and the research. So during that master's program, I ended up deciding that I didn't want to go for a PhD, and it would be better for me to go back to the job market and actually gain job experience instead of going for a PhD.
Right. And then what about the second master?
Yeah, so the second master's is an interesting story. Hopefully, people who are listening to this session can avoid doing that kind of decision very late in the game. I completed a master's, which I was perfectly happy with when I came back after my Fulbright. And I invested about 7 years working in public health in Pakistan. And in those 7 years, it was rewarding, but also challenging because of the work culture that I actually talked about before, but also because I felt like I was not doing anything game-changing. So game-changing is not the same as making minor improvements or marginal changes in something. Game-changing means making big leaps or doing something fundamentally different. And I also had a lot of interest in technology and information technology. So many people don't know, but I actually started coding when I was in 6th grade. And it was kind of a passion for me, but I ended up in medicine afterwards, which is a separate story. But suffice to say, I was unsatisfied, not unhappy. I was happy with the work that I was doing, but I was still unsatisfied that I wanted to do something more different. And I wanted to be contributing to something that is very game-changing for healthcare delivery. And for that matter, I wanted to actually transition into information technology formally. And so I went for another master's program and completed that. And since then, I've been working here in the Bay Area with very innovative companies that are actually game-changing.
Right. So you are a medical doctor, and then in our society, especially if you talk about Pakistan, like a doctor is a person who will have a stethoscope on his shoulder, and then he's saying patients, he or she's saying patients, and then you shifted to a public health, which according to a traditional culture of the medical education in Pakistan is kind of not very much welcomed. Like you will expect a medical doctor to be always seeing the patient, and then you transition from that position. And since I know you, you were one of the good or like students in Khyber Medical College, and then from there you move towards an information technology. So how do you see the blend of all these skills, like and was it useful for you in applying for different scholarship programs, or was it a disadvantage for you?
Sure. So one thing I'll preface, and this is, I think some people are asking about career decisions. So one thing I will say is I can make up a very good story about I did this and then did that, and that's how I planned all of this. But that would be a lie. This was not planned. It happened. I did something, and then I found out, oh, this is not working out for me, and then I did something else and ended up somewhere else. So one thing that young folks here should realize is that you can and you should plan your career for sure, but you should expect that it's from above. The master planner who plans what's going to happen with you is not in our control. So we plan, but things can happen and things can change. So you might be thinking today, XYZ is what I want to do, and that's it. And I'm not going to think about anything else. And you might be surprised 5 years down the lane by decisions that you make and you might go in a completely different direction. So you have to always look at what makes sense to you at that time, and be okay with it. Be flexible, especially early in your career. You should try to be flexible.
Right. So, having said that, now coming back to the U.S. Education market, as we will say, so when I'm in the U.S. and you're also in the U.S., so when we are not in U.S. and in Pakistan, when we're seeing the U.S. Educational opportunities from outside, we have a different perspective because you're seeing things only from the virtual environment. But when we inside the US, we have a very whole new perspective of the US. Particularly, I'm talking about the opportunities inside the US. So, what would you say generally about all the educational opportunities which are present in the US, which are in terms of direct admission as well as gaining some scholarship opportunities for master as well as PhD studies?
Yeah. So completely agree with that. There are a great many opportunities here, outside of the Fulbright sponsorship program as well. Fulbright is a great program, so that is, I would preface everything with that. But there are very interesting opportunities, and the number one issue that people have to think about when they are applying for graduate studies in the US is how are you going to finance your cost of studies, cost of education. And there are many options which I was either not aware of or I was not confident when 10 years ago, I was not confident that I'd actually be able to do all of that. And which was wrong of me to think that way. So people can apply to universities, and universities sometimes have very good scholarships of their own. Those do not have strings attached to them usually, of where you're supposed to work or not afterwards. Then people can take loans, and this is a common thing that I've seen in graduates who are from India. They will take loans. You can take loans from your home country financing institutions, or you can take loans in the US. And then there's obviously, when you're taking loans, there are some requirements. You might need to have a co-signer and things like that. Some people use their own savings. If you've got money and you can afford that, that's great. No loans, and you can just do it on your own, and that would be awesome. And then PhDs, I think, usually are funded. So when somebody gets into a PhD program, usually their funding is already secured through some grant or through some other means. So this issue of financing your studies is primarily a master's issue, not mostly for PhDs. So yeah, there are all these different kind of opportunities. The issue was that I was actually aware of these different options, but I never thought that I'd be able to do any of those. And when I made the decision to go for a second master's, that kind of pushed me into trying this, and I did that. So when I applied to Berkeley School of Information, I was offered a very good fellowship or scholarship, which is called the iSchools Fellows Program. And they funded my tuition completely for the first year and a big chunk of my second year. And so I had to use some of my savings, of course, but when I came here, I was able to secure teaching assistant positions. And the good thing about Berkeley is that when you're a teaching assistant, working more than I think 10 hours per week. I might be wrong there, but there's some minimum requirement. If you're doing that, your tuition for that semester is waived. So that's a big plus. You not only would you get salary as a teaching assistant, but your tuition is also waived for that semester. So I was able to do that for the second year, and basically tuition was waived all through. So I didn't pay for tuition anything. I worked. So that's the other piece. Some people can come here and they can get through programs by working part-time, usually as a teaching or research assistant. So that's another way to do this. And It's a little tough, but it's very doable, and I did it. I did it with family, so it's definitely doable if people think if people are wondering.
Right. So I want to just emphasize a bit more on this particular point because I have been through that process. And when I was in Pakistan, and considering the fact that all of us belong to middle class families, when we think of all of this process, especially when we think about the expenses inside the US, uh, there's kind of a mental block which stops us from taking a bold step in this direction. So what do you would you say particularly about this? And at the same time, like I will add another aspect to this question is how can you manage work with studies?
Sure. Yes, I agree. And like I mentioned before, I also had this kind of mental block before I actually tried this. So, my advice to the younger folks who are trying to do this is uh, be scared of nothing. Anything is possible, and you've got to be more confident. Even if you think you're confident, you've got to be more confident than that when you're trying something out. um, the other thing I would encourage people to do is do your research. Everything is available online. There is no excuse in this day and age to say, "Oh, I didn't know this was an option. मुझे नहीं पता था ये भी होता है." That's not an excuse. Everything is available online. You can go to university websites. You can look at, they even have separate sections of their websites describing how people can try to finance their education, because it's not a problem that is just for foreign graduates. It's also a challenge that other people who are studying there who are from the US, they also have to pay for it or fund their studies in some way. So it's a common challenge. Now they have more options, of course, because there are some U.S. government programs that support them. But it's regardless, it's the same challenge. So you can study these things beforehand. You can know what are the options. You can know what are the opportunities. It's all there. Then there's another kind of knowledge that is not or previously was not easily accessible or available to people, which was like tips and tricks on how do you work around certain problems, how do you work around certain roadblocks or challenges. Even for those, that kind of information, there are online forums now dedicated to how do you do immigration, how do you do how do you apply for visa, how do you get all these things done. So there should, again, I would say there should be no excuse for anyone to say, "Oh, I didn't know this," or "I could not figure out what other options were." So I would encourage people to do their homework, look for all the information that you can gather, and you will be in a better place if you know what are the options, instead of just picking one and thinking that's the only way to do it, and then trying too hard and missing out on other interesting or easier ways to get things done.
Right. I want to, before moving forward, I want to emphasize on one particular aspect of the direct admissions, which you said that for PhD admissions, almost all of the universities have the degree sponsored. Because when I was in Pakistan, again, there were a number of mental blocks in my mind. One is that okay, it's extremely difficult to get admitted in a PhD program. Then that was one block, and the second block was that okay, if you get admission, then you will need to pay a huge amount of money to get your degree. I was kind of, though I was somewhere knowing it that some of the university programs are sponsored, but I was like, if you get into the sponsored program, then you need to be extremely competent and out of the way. In other words, like you have to be something extremely extraordinary person. So, what do you think on that particular aspect of things?
Yeah. So yes, I would say, I would ask the question back to you. If you are extremely competent, and you're an expert in something, then why do you need more education? What's the point? So we sometimes overemphasize this. Universities are looking for students who are willing to learn, they're willing to put in the effort. Of course, they do look at your academic background and your how you've been performing so well or not so well in the past, and what are unique traits of your personality. So that's all fair, but they're looking for people who will be willing to put in the effort to learn. So that's working hard and studying hard and all that. Um, so people should not get scared of these requirements. These are not if you were required to be such an expert in something, then you don't need to go for a PhD. Then you're already past that point, maybe. So these expectations need to be toned down a little bit. In your mind, you should think, okay, I'm good enough. Otherwise, there's no point in doing all these programs. If you already achieved that level of excellence, then you're past that point.
Right. So I think we are almost to the near the end of our conversation. Before we ask a few more questions to Dr. Usman. Before I ask further questions to Dr. Usman, there is a lot of chatter in the chat box, and there are some questions which we'll take in the end as well. I will request, if there are any questions, now is the time to put them in the comments, because we'll be taking questions in the end. And I think I see one or two questions so far, which we'll take in the end. But so far, there is a lot of social conversation, a lot of get together is happening in the chatting section of this conversation. So moving forward, if you we had a lot of conversation related to direct versus Fulbright scholarship, because that is the main theme of our discussion. So would you like to summarize, okay, 1, 2, 3, these are the pros of the direct versus those are the pros and cons of the Fulbright scholarship? Would you like to summarize all these discussions to move the conversation forward?
Sure. So yeah, I think it's a good way to kind of summarize everything. When you look at Fulbright program, it's an excellent program in the sense that everything is funded. So your biggest concern, which is how to finance the cost of your education, is taken care of. So you don't have to worry about tuition. They will pay for living cost, so you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about health insurance, that is covered. You even don't have to pay for your air travel, because that is also covered. They will even arrange the tickets for you. Don't even have to buy the tickets yourself. And so everything is covered. So it's a very nice program in that sense. And that means that once you go and you're studying, you have a lot of time to study. And you also have a lot of time to network with other people there, which is something that I missed on the first time I came here. Big mistake that I made was only focus on studies. And with Fulbright, you have that opportunity of mixing up and integrating with the people there and building relationships that will serve you well later on. And in comparison, then, when you're applying for admission on your own, obviously the number one issue is how you're going to finance it. So we talked about different options, and people have to think about those, what makes sense for them. If somebody is going to be doing part-time jobs, they should know that it will limit their time available for studies. So then they have to be very efficient and pick things correctly, not waste time here and there. So that's the cost side of comparison. Then the other big piece is getting job experience after you're completing your program. On that side, the Fulbright program has its restrictions, so most people will have to return immediately after. So that's a drawback with the Fulbright program. But as I mentioned, people can try to get internships during the program or work part-time in the field of study, and that should help. They can also try to take on master's or PhD projects that are related to their home country's problems and try to bridge that gap. When you are going on your own, not on a program like Fulbright, then you have that opportunity to get into the job market right after. In fact, the first year is actually pretty easy, because you don't even you can get started very quickly for OPT or the optional practical training. You don't even need a job offer to apply for that OPT visa duration or status. So that's the biggest plus, I would say, on the job experience side of things. And once you're in the job market, then you have lots of opportunities. You can decide whether you want to go back, you want to stay a little longer, or go somewhere else or do something else. All of those options open up.
Right. So you are from a cohort which is quite senior. A cohort of Fulbright scholars, which has spent a lot of time working. So, what is your experience, and even the long run? Do the Fulbright scholars end up staying in Pakistan, or in the long run they end up, even after completing their bond, they reach up in the US or in other developing countries? What is your experience in this context?
Yeah, so I think if I looked at my immediate surroundings and the people that I know who have been or had been on Fulbright, um, most of them are no longer working in Pakistan. I would say, unfortunately, because that was not the intent of the program. Um, but many people I know have spent significant amount of time in Pakistan working on very meaningful problems and challenges, and there is a very large Fulbright community in Pakistan as well. So that's there. That said, I know a lot of people who have eventually decided to move elsewhere, either because of the work culture issues or because they could see a better opportunity elsewhere. And I told you my own story, what was my motivation for going on for another master's and working in a different place. So yeah, I think there are quite a few people who have moved on.
Right. So this is a. I think if I think of this point from the government's perspective, it is a huge loss for the society. So, do you think? Enough is being done to retain this workforce inside the country?
Yeah, I think that's a slightly off of the main topic question. I can touch on it briefly. I think that's something for the Fulbright Commission and the government counterparts to answer. I think they're trying. There are different programs. So, for PhDs who are coming back, there's a PhD placement program that will place them in different universities. How well that's working is a different story, but I think there have been efforts. There definitely need to be more efforts. On the other hand, the individual who is coming back to the country can also do a few things to make it easier for themselves, and one of them is to address your own expectation of what do you think is going to happen when you come back. That you need to be in touch with the reality. So your expectations are not too high or too different from what the reality is there. So that should help as well. But it's a very large brain drain issue. So that's something at a policy level that needs to be addressed.
Right. So with that, we are going to go towards our questions. There are a few of them. So the first question is from Ali Musa. He's saying that does the TA time is deducted from the total OPT duration or on-campus job?
Yeah, so OPT typically starts after you've done your master's or the PhD program, whichever program you're doing. So that would not count the TA time or teaching assistant time if you're referring to the time that you are spending during your master's program. That is not part of the OPT duration, so that's separate.
Okay. So the next question is for PhD direct admission. Is there anything like professor funding option there?
I think that would be best answered by somebody who has had that experience. I know from secondhand experiences that professor funding, I don't know what professor funding refers to, but I suppose this is referring to the professor having some kind of grant available to them in which they can fund PhD. That has definitely happened. I know there are people who have gotten funded through grants that the professor is managing. So that I know has happened.
So, because I'm also applying to different PhD programs, and I think again this may also be a bit tangential, but I want your input on this aspect as well. That when you're applying for a PhD program, there should you be writing to the professors, or you should be applying directly through uh, to the portal and just wait and watch, or just a combination of the two? Like, which we, if you have to apply for a PhD program, how would you do that?
You should talk to the professor first, in
Okay.
my opinion, because the professor is the one who is going to make the decision.
Okay.
So yes, of course, you have to do the application, everything. That you have to do anyways. But you should first try to get in touch with the professor and try to see if you can actually you can find a match. Look at what they are researching, what are their publications on. Are you actually interested in that topic or not? Because it's going to be a grueling 4, 5, 6 years working with that person. So if you're not interested in that topic, then it's going to be very hard for you to convince yourself to work, and for that professor to be convinced that you are actually interested. So yeah, that I would definitely recommend talking to the professors first.
So you bring a very interesting point in this context, is that when you talk to the professor, it's not only the professor selecting you, but it's also the point that, okay, we have this notion that, okay, get into any program, but what happens is that people get into programs, they find it misfit for themselves. So that is, so another important aspect is to find out whether you fit into the program or not, right? Okay, so then I think somebody wants to go to Berkeley, and the question is related to you, the institution from where you did your second master. And it is, what is a safe GRE score to get in the same master program at UC Berkeley?
I believe they removed the GRE requirements recently during COVID. So I think you should go and check online on the school's website. Uh, I did GRE twice. First for the Harvard application through Fulbright, and this time for Berkeley. Both time I got a decent score. So the first time was, I think, in 1400s or 1500s, and that was the time when it was the total score used to be 1600. So now I think it's different, or at least when I did it 5 years ago, it was in the, I think I had 300s or 360s. But regardless, I think that's not. Let's not worry too much about the score at this point. First, you should confirm what is the requirement, and then the higher the better for top universities that you want to get into. The higher the better. But I believe that Berkeley has removed the GRE requirement, so you might want to check again.
Right, but that is only for the COVID related restrictions, right? I mean, because of the issues related to COVID, but next year it might not be the same, right?
I'm not sure. Actually, I've heard some talk about having this removed indefinitely. So,
Oh, okay.
so maybe that's why I'm saying you should check. These things are changing very rapidly. So people who want to apply, they should go online and get the latest information from the most reliable source, which is the university website. If you have any questions, just email them and they will respond. I found the Berkeley to be very responsive. Berkeley teams to be very responsive to any queries.
Yeah, so add to that, because as I mentioned, I'm also applying to PhD programs this fall, and not only to Berkeley, but to any institution. Like, we have this hesitancy of contacting the institutions. I mean, you contact them, you call them, or you email them, they are extremely professional and they respond very quickly. So that's, like, you should talk to them. So there is some comment related to reverse cultural shock, misplaced expectation, treatment in job market. I think we kind of touched on the reverse cultural shock, but would you like to explain it a bit more in the context of this comment?
Yeah, I think we talked about this. The reverse culture shock is you get settled in an environment where systems are working and things are working as you expect. So there is predictability. So when you wake up tomorrow, you know what's going to happen. Our life in Pakistan is very exciting, and you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a different environment. And maybe I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but I think that the point is that life is less predictable, uh, and there's a lot more emphasis on social connection. So even during COVID, you will look at some Western countries or states in the United States where uh, social distancing is practiced very, very diligently. Whereas other places, or like you think about India, Pakistan, you can't even imagine having social distancing. People are attending weddings and so on, gatherings, and so it's a very different culture. So when you get used to something and you come back, you do feel that kind of shock. And um, so a person who's crossing the road in the wrong way, or the driver next to you who's honking, might anger you more than it used to when you had not seen a different place. So those kind of things over time, they build up and they cause you to be frustrated and sometimes depressed.
Right. So this is a very specific question related to the 18 months academic training. What is it?
I'm actually not sure what this is referring to. If this is referring to OPT, because that is also sometimes called academic training, the optional practical training, that's a period of time after your master's or PhD in which you can do a full-time paid job in the US. And depending on your type of degree, it can be 1 year or it can be longer than that.
Right. So I think I know the answer to this question. Actually, that is something within the Fulbright scholars. But the sad part is that Pakistani Fulbright scholars are not eligible for this. This is
Right.
18 months and for the master program and 36 months for the PhD program. So what happens that you get a job offer, and as you get an approval. So there are two types of training programs within the Fulbright scholarships. One is the pre-degree training program, one is the post-degree training program. And in the post-degree training program, you need to get a job offer, and then you get a visa extension for the 18 months in the case of the master program, and 36 months for the PhD program. But the big point is that some countries are eligible, others are not, and unfortunately, Pakistani Fulbright scholars, for some unknown reason, are not eligible for this. We have some more questions and comments, and let's read. Thanks a lot for today's session, especially for sharing a challenges return to Pakistan. Okay, and my question is related to application process and the funding. How important is to contact supervisors ahead of submitting the applications to SOFA for PhD? I think we touched on this, but if you would, you like to briefly touch on it again?
Yeah, I think we already touched on this. If you're applying for a PhD, you should definitely try to talk to the professors. If you can do that, it should help in your application. The SOFAS application process is a process that you just have to do, but eventually it will go to that committee, including the professor. I think sometimes, or mostly, you also have to specify who you want to work with, or what topic you want to choose for your PhD. So yeah, I think it'd be very helpful for people to try and get in touch with the supervisors. I know people from my cohort of Fulbright who got a PhD program with not a very great GRE score, only because they had been actually not just contacting, but actually working with that professor in a very top university even before they applied for Fulbright. So they had some research project going on in Pakistan, and they were volunteering, and they were in contact with the professor, and they had told them, I'm interested in going for a PhD program. And so when they applied, the application went, even though the GRE score was not very good, that connection helped a lot. And so I know those kind of stories.
Right. I think this is the last comment of the question. Is it a good idea to ask supervisor directly for funding opportunities, as the application fees for each university is high, and the higher application fees is to avoid receiving thousands of applications? I think kind of we touched on this topic as well, which is so we'll move ahead. I think if you're applying for a PhD, then most of the time it's funded, and your main focus will be to connect with the supervisor or some people call it supervisor. Some places it is called as advisor. So you connect with them, make connections, and then get admission in the university, and the rest of the things are taken care of. If you and I think we have talked about in this session. I think that was all. I do not see any more questions. With that, I think we are almost. We it's the end of our time for this session as well. So those of you who are watching this session live, I will request you people to please share this video with your colleagues. Please, if you are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and do not forget to press the bell icon. And with that, I will be extremely thankful. I'm extremely thankful to Dr. Usman for spending a very valuable 1 hour with us, especially on Sunday morning, because it's earlier in his time zone. So Dr. Usman, thanks a lot for time. Would you like to say anything before we call it a day?
I think thanks very much, Amir. It's great to talk to you and the rest of the audience, and it's a very important topic. I would like to leave with just one, I would say, career advice, and it's specific to people who are early in their career. So whatever you're trying to do, if you are in an early stage of your career, you're just getting started, you're deciding what to do, the best piece of advice that I got, and I'm passing it on, is try to do things that will increase your options, and try not to narrow down too early, too soon. So early on you can make mistakes, you can change course, and you want to go for the thing that is really your thing, and you're going to enjoy doing that, and going to be rewarding for you and meaningful. And for everybody that has a different meaning, what is rewarding. So that's the one suggestion or advice that I would give to people who are early in their career. Do things that will increase your options and not narrow too soon.
Very good generic message for everybody, and the message I would like to do is that do not be taken away by the mental blocks which we have in the developing countries. Just apply. There are many opportunities. There is a huge world of opportunities inside the US. Whether you are applying for the direct admission or the Fulbright, you have all the options. There is a previous panel discussion, and this discussion in combination will give you a comprehensive information to you. I will put in the link to the description to the previous panel discussion as well. So if you want to have a look at that. And with that note, I will say goodbye and Allah Hafiz to everyone. Take care of yourself. Bye.
Thank you.